Good evening, dear friends. We are at the 27th video of the Divine Order and the Universe Reading and Commentary series. Welcome, dear Ümit.
Good evening, everyone.
We are almost at the end of the first part of the book. We had started with the amorphous matter, continued with the state of being, and all those developmentary stages the being has to go through, that is, plant, animal and human, discussed the new model of consciousness. And last week, we read and discussed the topics of incarnation and disincarnation in wider context. We progressed slowly, by digesting all this knowledge. And, this evening, we will read more about the topic of death. Would you like to say something before I begin reading?
I'd like to say that more we widen our comprehension about dying, death and hereafter, more conscious we can be when the inevitable moment arrives. We need to know about death as much as we can.
In the examples you shared last week, the most important topic is the imagination. Because we see that the unconscious where we accumulate all the material related to our current life, pushes this accumulated information to the subconscious at the event of death. And the assessment or the accounting that to be made by our being in the spatium, feelings, emotions, thoughts, images, beliefs related to our current life will become very important. And in the spatium period, there will be no defense mechanisms we have while we are alive. So, our being will be all alone with all those information, and these will be vivid imagery of the spatium period. So, the deceased person, until all traces of his or her personality vanishes, will be face to face with his or her own images, symbols and meanings. Therefore, to be able to die well in this life, we need to work on all those unconscious materials of ours. Alright, let's start reading. Death is a quantitative expression of the value differentiation in a certain moment, under the harmony of the divine order. That is, after a worldly body has served properly as required by the spirit throughout its worldly life, its purpose in serving that spirit as a vehicle ceases to be. Consequently, values in that body must decrease. For, in the divine order, it is an imperative to terminate all processes which are no longer necessary. And, by this imperative, the influences, that is, the values descending to the worldly body which has accomplished its all functions and turned out useless in the face of the being that caused it to animate, will terminate. By the termination of these influences, some part of the motions in its combinations begins to be erased. Meanwhile, by the intervention of the influences coming from below, that body cannot preserve its former form and state anymore. It starts to disintegrate and disperse, and the qualitative appearance of this state is death, and it occurs with the cell beings in the brain starting to forsake their bodies. For, brain cells forsaking their bodies means that the being who governs these cells is severing its relation to the body. The being, who benefited from this body throughout its earthly life, needs to be cultivated and fed with more suitable combinations on the values and mechanisms of the higher influences in order to continue further developmental and evolutionary stages. In the series of embodiments in a world, as the deaths and the births of the being continue, its work in that world finally ends. So, as the amount of higher influences belonging to the body which needs to be forsaken there forever is decreased for the last time, on the other hand and at the same time, the amount of influences and values of a body belonging to another cosmos are increased. Therefore, the being serving the evolution of spirit will leave that milieu with its last death in the world and will pass to a higher milieu, encompassing and with abundant possibilities. So, for the evolution of a spirit, as for the birth of a being, that is, its subtle material vehicle in the universe, is an imperative and a necessity, also likewise for this subtle being to be able to serve further evolution of the spirit, its leaving the crude milieus which became useless and passing to the higher milieus it needs is the imperative of an equally powerful necessity.
In this passage, we read that death is actually a value differentiation, as well. If you remember, we had discussed in our previous videos, the connection between being and body is the vibrations coming from the being to the magnetic field of the brain cell beings that make up the consciousness center. And these influences or vibrations are values that keep our body alive, and also keep all those myriad matter combinations together that make up this body. So, as long as these influences are coming from the being, all those vital processes are done in the body, and when these influences cease, the body is not alive anymore and gradually disintegrates. Of course, in the natural course of events, our body ages, we get old, becomes exposed to many influences. Here, we talk about the event of death, so let me repeat that, when these values cease, the body is not alive anymore and gradually disintegrates. This is a quantitative expression of the value differentiation. We can consider values as influence and motion, as well. Because, the activity, movement and motion in matter must continue, otherwise it reverts to its amorphous state. And also, we now know that all physical, physiological, biological and psychological functions of our body are of matter, consequently, all of our memories, emotions, feelings, sensations, thoughts, beliefs, attitudes, in short, everything that forms our worldly personality are of matter, as well. And when the values or influences from our being ceases, all of these begin to disintegrate as well. So, all those processing in the spatium is again, the inter-influencing among matter, in varying levels of crudeness and subtlety. This is the process from the perspective of the mechanism of influence and the value differentiation. From the perspective, let's say, of Ümit, within this body and life plan, after I acquired various experiences I need to acquire, I went through tests and trials, I encountered the events that are put on my path or the events I caused by the choices I made in accordance with the needs of my being. A point in time comes that, further events to be encountered will not add more to my being. Then, my being will need either a new body with more possibilities or will be ready to complete the human stage in the hydrogen realm. Then it is an imperative for my being to cease or withdraw its subtle vibrations, influences or values it has been sending to the consciousness center of my body, because my being needs to continue its developmental journey in the higher realms with more possibilities. Last week, I kept on giving examples of elementary school. If I continue with this, do we need to go back to the first grade, to those uniforms, to those tiny desks? I think, this is also the case with our being. After acquiring myriad experiences within those 500 to 700 lifetimes, and after translating or transforming this acquisition to the essence knowledge that to be reflected back to its spirit, the being will not need to go through all those related tests and trials anymore. Therefore, the being withdraws or pulls back its influences from the body, and after going through the spatium phase for synthesizing the acquisition from the last life with the stored acquisition in the subconscious, the being will reflect its essential knowledge to its spirit. So, this is an imperative and also necessary for the evolution of its spirit.
And we see that within our universe, even the seemingly eternal things have an end, the law of entropy prevails. Yes, from the moment we are conceived in the womb, our cells multiply, and as we are growing up as human beings, our being gets developed and experienced, but after a certain point, our body gets old, ages. Because a single lifetime responds to only a limited reality. Despite this fact, we humans try to make our bodies and realities immortal within a single lifetime. Yet, as you said, in each point of the universe there is activity, momentum, movement, motion that brings change, value differentiations, widenings, transformations. Imagine if humanity lives forever in one state of development, let's say, in Stone Age or in the medieval times. Then, it would be impossible for us to get developed, to become more conscious, to have more possibilities to pass from instincts to intuitions and then, to the conscientious acts. Even within the last 100 years, we have been witnessing the fast increase in the possibilities matter reveals, and in the variations of the needs of our being. Why this fast increase? If I continue with your school example, we are getting nearer to graduation. And, as stated in this passage, when we will pass to a higher level, from one realm to another realm, we go through a preparatory phase, an adaptation phase, and the influences from that upper level or realm start to come to us. Even the reality we are currently in has lower layers and upper layers. And, naturally, we start from the bottom, and by moving gradually up, we go upper levels. And when we reach an upper level of reality, we are expected to exhaust all materials of the past reality, such as thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and this means degeneration. That is, we walked that path and are being utilized and exhausted all material possibilities to complete this leg of its journey. And after walking this long and winding path, we need to take off the worn-out shoes. We need to set aside the matter that is not functional anymore, so these can revert to its building blocks in accordance with the law of entropy. And do they vanish? No, they are transformed to other things. And we read in this passage that what that does not degenerate after death is the magnetic field of the brain cell beings which carry the accumulated information of that last life. We had previously said that these brain cells beings are one of the novel types of knowledge we read in the divine order and the universe. Millions of beings of these millions of brain cells don't disperse after death. They are kept together by the influence of the being over their magnetic field synthesis, and allow the continuity of the being's acquisitions through lifetimes. And if the result of the accounting period in the spatium makes it necessary for the being to build another body in the crude matter, then the being utilizes this magnetic field synthesis under its control for influencing newly forming brain cells of a fetus, by concentrating the 7/8 of its energy and influences. And we read in this passage that when death occurs, brain cells beings begin to leave those cells. And we know that a body is considered truly dead when the doctors announce brain death, when there are no brainstem reflexes in the body. And when brain cells die, the being cannot utilize that body anymore, cannot go back influencing that body. On the other hand, as we read in this passage, when the being's work in a world ends after a series of the births and the deaths of the bodies the being builds, that is, after a series of embodiments, the being begins to receive influences and values of a body belonging to another cosmos. So, the being continues. Naming is so apt. Being. It is meant to be. And the book describes the being as an ensemble of influences and energies complex. And all births and deaths of the bodies our being builds occur via influences and vibrations our being's projects to and withdraws from these bodies. And this need of the being for a more encompassing milieu with a wider comprehension is an imperative because the being is built to be in service to its spirit until the end of the universe to ever widen the fields of experience, fields of movement and motion. All right, let's continue reading. All forms and states result in human death, illnesses, seizures, murders, accidents. Natural events are only to fulfill these imperatives of necessity in the most suitable manner for the ensuing development and evolution of that being. After learning this truth, there is no meaning to deem the death and the states causing death as disasters in themselves. Here, the whole issue is, during this transition from a lower milieu to a higher milieu that is called death, the necessity of man's having properly completed the deeds expected from him and not having digressed from the higher realities of his conscience which was his sole guide as he successfully lived through his life. As he does this, by obeying the higher realities, he does not lose the right way, as well as ensuring the further developments of his conscience and so benefiting to that extent from its strengthening guidance. Therefore, conscience in the world is the most powerful support and redeemer of mankind in the path of evolution.
This last sentence is the summarizing sentence of the neo-spiritualism school shared in its body of knowledge since 1950. Here, in this passage, the most striking phrase is that there is no meaning to deem the death and the states causing death as disasters in themselves. This book's aim to widen our human comprehension about this fact and also about our rigid concepts of good and bad. We now reach the end of part 1 of this book, but soon we will start the second part, titled as World, Disharmony, Harmony. The book states that disharmony is only in the perception of human reality, in the human condition. And the causes of death as listed in this passage, illnesses, seizures, murders, accidents, natural events. These appearances emerge in accordance with the needs of each being, with each necessity destined by the cause and effect chains of the event or matter combinations, under the governance of the mechanism of destiny. So, the conditions of the death, be it a homicide or an accident, occur in the most suitable way for the developmentary needs of the being. The manner of death is the most ideal for the being when in the accounting period in the spatium state, while comparing the acquisitions in the unconscious with the acquisitions in the subconscious. And from our human perspective, yes, we cry, we grieve when somebody dies, especially when a loved one dies. And please don't think that we don't feel anything about that we are free of such sadness or grief. No, when one of our loved ones passes away, we feel all kinds of feelings and emotions the world reality entails. Yet, the most important point is, if a loved one dies, this may be a parent, a sibling, a child, a dear friend of ours, we can feel some relief by thinking that their beings are moving towards the milieus or realms with more possibilities, with wider comprehension. After grasping this knowledge, after understanding that death is not a total annihilation, not such a bad ending, we may even feel happy on behalf of our deceased loved ones. Another important point in this passage is the referral made to the conscience. The second part of the book will begin with the conscience, as well, but again, I'd like to underline again that, as human beings, our natural responsibility in this lifetime is to ensure that our being can complete its work, of course, in accordance with the level of comprehension of ours. We are responsible for the things we know and we experience. So, in our current level of development, we are expected to think and act in accordance with the level of our being, and of course, to choose doing this or not doing this. All event and matter combination will be arranged and rearranged as a response to our choosing.
Yes, the conscience is our true guide and our true redeemer. Our friends are asking questions like, so what should we do? How can we get out of the confusion after death? How we can avoid the confusion? Actually, we know the answer to such questions very well because all teachings and revelations had talked about it, gave the signs of it. Our reactions to the event patterns we encounter in life, our fairness in our reactions, in our choices, not harming the life, honor and property of other human beings, acting by higher values in regard to these, caring for the greater good. And what we should do is to live the life we are born into, without avoiding life and whatever events in life bring us. We should act by taking responsibility, ever widening with our comprehension, first, for our body, for our family, for our community, for humanity, for our world, and for our universe. We should act consciously and with awareness, by taking into consideration the balance in everything. One may think this is too much responsibility for an average lifetime, but it seems unfair only if we look at this greater picture from a narrow perspective of assuming we have only one lifetime. Yet, when we apply this to the knowledge given in this book about 500 to 700 lifetimes to be lived throughout the human stage, as a very long process of learning and experience for the widening of comprehension of the being, it may begin to seem fair. And we can see the harmony only from a wider perspective.
And also, when we have questions about what is fair or unfair, we must remember that the events and conditions we encounter now are the seedlings or fruits of the seeds we sow, the effects of the causes we started in those past lives. And there is no injustice when we remember that whatever happens serve the evolution of the spirits. And, I'd like to say a few things about responsibility. Of course, this is my general observation, but maybe our friends observe this, as well. People say, I am harmless, I don't hurt or harm anything. Yes, this is a good thing in itself, but if this means that we don't act at all in case we can do harm, then it is not so good. What about becoming beneficial? Getting out of this state of harmlessness and becoming beneficial to humanity, nature, animals, existence? Then it means that we are moving on our path and giving its due to all accumulations of the actions and experiences of all other human beings that helped knowingly or unknowingly in shaping us our current state. For example, Together we are reading this book, and my learning how to read contains the efforts of my teacher when I was a first grader. Many abilities we acquired until now were not with us when we are born. We learnt these by the efforts and help of other human beings. We learn from each other, and if we had acquired these abilities and talents, we cannot sit on these by doing nothing with these. We need to share willingly. It may sound oxymoron, but sharing also entails to be the problem as much as to be the solution. I think, as we read on about the conscience and why earthly cravings or selfishness is set against it as an opposite, we will understand this much better.
Yes, we will start reading the second part of this book. And this part is titled as World, Disharmony, Harmony. Let's continue reading. In human life, the developmental mechanism appearing as conscience is not particular only to this stage. It is a preliminary developmental and evolutionary mechanism which all beings in the world are subject to. Therefore, it is necessary to define and understand conscience with this general value. Conscience is a preparatory mechanism orientated to the realization of duty, which is the purpose of all acts and actions for beings. Since the purpose of all beings is evolution and the meaning of evolution at the stage of humanity is preparation for the superworld plan of duty, the conscience mechanism, of which the definition is based on the concept of preparation for duty, must be all-inclusive for all beings in the world. On the other hand, there is a unity between the development of comprehension and conscience. However, the comprehension of beings varies greatly according to their levels of development. So, among beings with varying comprehensions, their understanding of conscience and conscience applications will accordingly be different.
Yes, a short passage, but it tells us so much. We read here that the conscience is a developmental mechanism and we, in the human stage, perceive this as conscience. Still, all beings that built bodies in different levels of development are subject to this mechanism. Yet, this mechanism takes the form of conscience when a being reaches the stage of human. And as we read here, the conscience is a preparatory mechanism to duty. So, as the beings go through previous developmentary stages, that is, plant and animal stages, this mechanism takes different forms, and soon we will read about these. And this preparation is orientated to the realization of duty, which is the purpose of all acts and actions for beings. And this comprehension of duty can be understood only by the beings that completed their work in this hydrogen cosmos. For the rest of us, we can only gain intuitions about this. And again, we see in this passage, the book underlines the unity between the comprehension and the conscience. And of course, each being's level of comprehension is different than of the other beings, so application of conscience varies accordingly. This explains why each human being is born with different life plans and live through different life experiences, because this is parallel to each being's level of comprehension. And as their level of conscience gets developed, their comprehension will increase accordingly. And this passage is only an introduction to this parallel development.
We had discussed the beings gaining instincts during the developmentary stage of plant, and as an example, we talked how sunflowers turn towards the sunlight as an instinct. But we don't see sunflowers that choose not doing this, correct? So, we cannot talk about a sense of responsibility or conscience for a being in that stage of plant. Or in the stage of animal. Instincts are much stronger in that stage, but initial intuitions start to be added to these, and the reactions, understanding, and capacity of the being in that stage gets wider because of more influences the being can receive and send out. Still, in majority of the animal beings, development does not display explicit indications of taking responsibility, of arriving at conclusions by discerning cause and effect connections, of taking lessons from experiences. We only see these explicit indications as the being reaches the stage of human, of course, in varying degrees. As the frontal cortex of the human body gets activated, something else occurs. Making connections, awareness about cause and effect chains, gaining comprehension, and as these emerge and gets developed, the sense of responsibility in acting on responsibilities. Of course, as we read in this passage, the conscience is not exclusive to the stage of human. It prevails on all developmentary levels as the being moves towards the plan of duty. So there are many other appearances of the conscience. Let me read this sentence again. Conscience is a preparatory mechanism orientated to the realization of duty, which is the purpose of all acts and actions for beings. Therefore, all of our acts and actions and reactions, and this includes, as you said, staying passive or not taking responsibility, because this is also a choosing, this is also a reaction. So, all of these bring us responsibilities to bear. I mean, remaining inactive in the name of harmlessness. As the saying goes, long live the snake that doesn't bite me. Even such an attitude causes effects that we have to live through. This system ensures the being's preparation to the plan of duty, either orienting beings or nudging them towards becoming prepared for the higher plans. Because, at the higher plans, it is obvious that in that first levels of the plan of duty, beings become responsible for the beings that are still in the relatively lower developmentary preparations. We will read more about this in the further pages of the book. Still, we already read what kind of duties the beings reached the initial steps of the plan of duty are assigned with, such as becoming guiding beings for other beings, becoming involved in the cadres that govern and manage the realization of the life plan of a being. And this means that every higher reality the being arrives at encompasses or embraces the former reality because the being completed it, gained the knowledge of it, and now can become the being in duty for that reality. And the divine order and the universe states many times that a being has the potential of becoming of that harmony of the universe. In that sense, we read here the very significant description for the conscience, as the purpose of all acts and actions for beings. Even while we sleep, we make an accounting of the whole day, assessing all events of the day in the light of the influences from our being. Even in that seemingly passive state, the movement and motion of our being continues. As you said, this short passage tells us so many things to think about.
After reading this description, whenever the questions like, "What is my duty in life?" arise in our minds, we must remember this, to prepare for the comprehension of duty. Of course, in our minds, the concept of a being with duty has some other meanings, like a great leader or a savior, or even nowadays a superhero. Yes, our duty in life is to get prepared for the plan of duty.
All right, let's continue reading. So far, only the state of conscience at the stage of human has been studied, and its states and situations corresponding to its other stages have been left out of the account. This situation has not allowed mankind to study the consecutive flow of conscience in stages starting from initial plant life to human life. However, studying conscience within the whole of world life is necessary for understanding the knowledge of evolution better. Conscience, with its general and comprehensive implications, should be studied under the light of the duality principle and value differentiation.
Starting from this passage, the book will explain how this developmentary mechanism appears and works in the stages the being goes through as it gets developed, how this gets developed in the plant stage, in the animal stage, and how this mechanism works by the duality principle and the value differentiation. As humans, we name the form this mechanism assumes as the conscience. The divine order and the universe first explained that everything in the universe is matter, then explained what is simple matter and how it gets more complex. And also, explained how the duality principle and value differentiation works, starting from the initial atom. Now that we learnt this, we will read about more complex appearances of this developmentary mechanism, how it works at the background of everything, by inter-influences between matter, and event combinations.
Within our system, everything advances by value differentiations between opposites like negative and positive, and, as beings, whichever opposite of this polarity we choose from, we add the related values into our structure. This is again an issue of scale. What is the difference between the ability of governing a very complex being and the ability of governing a cell? It is still done by value differentiation, but in a big or a small scale. and the being cannot not pass from a state of ability for transforming and governing the simple matter to a state of ability for transforming and governing the complex matter right away. No, within a developmentary mechanism, the being progress step by step, level by level, stage by stage as it widens its capacity to do this.
I'd like to add something. We had read in the earlier passages about the values, the duality principle and the value differentiation that, for us humans it is easy to observe cruder appearances of the value differentiation, but as our comprehension widens, we can observe myriad nuances of the value differentiation's workings. For example, the exchange of heat between a hot object and a cold object is due to the value differentiation. But, a teacher's conveying information to the pupils in the class is another example of the value differentiation, as well. A prophet's revelations and his exemplary life for others brings out a value differentiation in his followers. Again, as in the event of death, when the being withdraws its influences from the brain of the body, a value differentiation occurs. Right now, together with our friends, we are exchanging influences. The value differentiation is occurring in our minds, in our organisms, all the time. In general, the value differentiation happens through increased or decreased influences in a structure, in an organism, and this increasing or decreasing of influences happen via exchanges between magnetic fields of objects and beings. So, working of this mechanism can be observed in everything, and especially, in our inner world. And this book advises us to observe increasingly complex or subtle states of this value differentiation.
In other words, elevating vibrations. You know, nowadays it is in general use, when you feel down, somebody says, think positive things, it elevates your vibrations. Yes, when we invite higher values into our organism, we feel much better. Or, the opposite. You feel down, you invite more negative thoughts, that is, influences in lesser value, not sublimating, then this value differentiation disrupts the equilibrium within us towards more negative. Within this dualistic system, this oscillation, this swinging between two opposites occur in each and every state of the universe. Yes, let's continue reading. We have previously explained in detail that everything happens in our whole cosmos through the duality principle and value differentiation mechanism, and no particle, no event or concept can be excluded from this principle. And, conscience, a powerful mechanism for evolutionary preparation in the world, also obeys this principle. Therefore, conscience is a duality unit. We have mentioned that the duality unit comprises two opposing components. We will explain these opposite components of the conscience duality. The existence of opposites in any duality unit is necessary for its function. When there are no opposites, the purpose of existence of that unit cannot be realized. Therefore, one of the opposite components of the conscience which is aimed at ensuring development, the higher one, is directed towards a sense of duty. On the other hand, its opposite, that is, lower component, is the earthly cravings, hindering the former's advance along the path of acquiring a sense of duty. Consequently, we will call the former the duty preparation component and the latter the earthly craving component. So, the conscience mechanism, which works for the preparation of beings in the world to the plan of duty, has two opposite components. One is directed towards duty and the other is directed towards the earthly cravings, and the conscience mechanism works through conflicts, struggles and states of equilibrium which occur as the result of these two components' continuous value differentiation, that is, as one or other opposite receives superior values and influences. And the being's advancement takes on various forms in accordance with these states of equilibrium. These conflicts and states of equilibrium exist in all stages of all beings in the world, according to their powers of instinct, intuition, and comprehension.
Yes, as we previously explained, everything in our universe is of matter, even the things we name as psychological or spiritual are of matter. And each matter part, and consequently, every matter combination that are made up of these parts or particles are of matter. And each matter part is a duality unit, that is, contains two opposites that exist in equilibrium. This state of initial matter also reflects the spirit-matter duality, as the book had stated in the first part. The initial dualistic unit is built in this way by the first influence of the original principle, that first influence that added values to one of the opposites of the duality unit, and because the equilibrium must be restored in the unit, some of these values flux to the other opposite and the initial motion has begun. And of course, because nothing can be excluded from this duality principle, we read in this passage that conscience is a duality unit as well. We had read the bar magnet example in the book. If you remember, in the middle of the bar magnet, there was a neuter line, a point of equilibrium. And if we extend one polarity, this line was coming up to restore the balance between these two polarities. Similar to this example, we now read here, conscience has an opposite, and it is earthly cravings, or our selfish, egoistical side. Simply, we have a side for positive and a side for negative, and the conscience, as a guide and redeemer within us, orients us toward the positive side, or in other words, to receive subliming influences, and by receiving more and more subliming influences, we get prepared for the realities of the plan of duty. Well, if this is the purpose, why we have an opposing side? Because, then, it would be impossible to evaluate the merit of the beings. The beings have to go test and trials caused by this opposing side, and for us humans, this opposing side is the earthly cravings. Let's imagine that we keep on inviting sublimating values to our duality unit, we live a good life, act conscientiously, we are beneficial to the community, to humanity. As we keep on living in this way, the influences we send out our vicinity get sublimated, reflecting the sublimating influences we invite to our organism. Even, at the event of death, our mental and emotional imagery becomes less troublesome in the spatium period because there is less and less clinging to earthly cravings, to matter. Actually, this is the description of an ideal human being. Yet, none of us keep on living like this. For a major part of our lifetimes, we are mostly oriented towards the earthly cravings. Fortunately, the other opposite's pull is stronger, and either with the pangs of conscience or the shocks the events cause, we are shaken time to time and go back to our senses.
And, even the earthly cravings have myriad appearances to be aware of. Cruder ones are easy to notice, observe or detect, such as selfishness, grudges, grievances, exploiting and abusing others, caring only one's self-interests on expense of others, etc. Still, there is also the concept of subtle earthly cravings. These are harder to detect and observe. Especially, people in spiritual search may experience these. You read a book, hear a lecture, join a workshop, and suddenly you may think that you are awakened. Yet, unless a person is unaware of the materials of their inner world, of the parts they deny, ignore or belittle, these will cause some pitfalls on their spiritual path. As our elders say, as the path goes upward, the ground gets more slippery. Because, most of the time, we deceive ourselves, we justify our mistakes, etc. And we must remember that, no matter which level of reality we are in, it is so easy to cling to it. And while we think that we are awakened, we may be soundly asleep in our reality. That's why, all spiritual teachings tries teaching human beings how to awaken to themselves, by many practices and advices about how to lessen the grip of the earthly cravings, because only then, the capacity for compassion increases. And our friends are asking, how can we understand loosening of the grip of earthly cravings? Well, including ourselves, we must look for the actions rather than talking. What we talk and speak here doesn't mean that we properly apply all of these into our life. Thankfully, whenever we assume that we did, events bring new tests and trials and say to us, now, walk the talk, if you can. And as we go through those tests and trials, it becomes apparent and even observable if we are or are not in balance, if we know or don't know what is more beneficial for our being, if we are aware or unaware of our limits, if we take or don't take responsibility for our choices, be it personal, mental, physical, or spiritual. Because, in many teachings we read that we are responsible for our actions and thoughts. I mean, if you think about killing someone but don't act on this thought, you may think that you are good because you didn't do anything. Yet, you have already sent out vibrations of this thought to the magnetic field of that person. You are responsible for that thought as well. Therefore, we see that our responsibility is valid in every level, in every layer. If we are not aware of our thoughts and feelings and their influences over other beings, then the events of life persistently push us externally or internally so we can become aware of these. Right now, we are experiencing a pandemic. Whole world is affected by this virus. And apparently, many people will be jobless because of the disruption of world economy. So, we will soon experience more consequences, and most of us will have to leave their comfort zones. And this is a gradual one. If we think about a big earthquake or another natural disaster, within seconds, we are thrown out of our comfort zones. Things we assume that we own become destroyed within seconds. So, in the coming years, whatever we cling to will be shaken off from our grip. In that sense, we must start working on our identifications because there will be larger tests and trials on our path. Yes, with these words, let us say good evening to you, dear friends. See you next week.
Good evening.